The glittering world of global pop music often appears from the outside to be an effortless tapestry of fame, fortune, and unyielding camaraderie. Yet behind the dazzling neon lights and the deafening screams of millions of adoring fans lies a fragile ecosystem where a single misstep can shatter the grandest of dreams before they even have a chance to truly begin. In the mid-1990s, the cultural landscape was on the absolute precipice of a seismic shift, an era waiting for an unprecedented phenomenon that would redefine modern entertainment, heavily influence youth culture across the entire globe, and establish a completely new blueprint for commercial success in the music industry. We look back at these monumental figures now as timeless icons, larger-than-life personalities who conquered every single stadium, television screen, and radio frequency from London to Tokyo. But there was a distinct moment in time when all of this monumental future hung by an incredibly thin and highly volatile thread. Before the massive stadium tours, the multi-platinum record sales, the iconic feature films, and the ubiquitous merchandise that filled the bedrooms of teenagers worldwide, there was simply a group of 5 fiercely ambitious young women trying to find their footing in a notoriously brutal and unpredictable business that rarely offered anyone a second chance. If you find yourself fascinated by the hidden histories of the music industry and the intense, unseen struggles that go into building the world's most successful artistic acts, please take a quick moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the dramatic stories that shaped pop culture history. The journey to the absolute pinnacle of the music world is rarely a smooth or linear path, and for this specific group of artists, the ultimate test of their collective resilience arrived far earlier than the public ever realized. Occurring during a cold night in London, when the bright lights of an awards ceremony bore witness to a silent fracture that very nearly altered the course of modern music history forever, to fully comprehend the immense weight of this hidden crisis, one must travel back to the distinct atmosphere of the year 1996, a period when the British music scene was experiencing a monumental renaissance, brimming with creative energy, fierce competition, and a sense of absolute hedonism that defined the major industry gatherings of the era. The annual Brit Awards had long established themselves as the premier battleground and celebration for the nation's musical elite, a high-stakes evening where legendary rock stars, eccentric producers, and wealthy executives rubbed shoulders, drank endless rivers of expensive champagne, and engaged in the kind of legendary late-night revelry that tabloids would feast upon for weeks to come. Into this hypercharged, high-status environment walked 5 young women who were entirely unknown to the general public, individuals who possessed an abundance of raw talent, unique style, and unshakable ambition, but who had yet to release a single note of music to the wider world. They were a collective unit functioning on pure faith, spending endless hours in grueling rehearsal studios, perfecting their harmonies, practicing their routines, and projecting an aura of absolute confidence, despite having absolutely no mainstream validation or commercial points of success to back it up. On this particular evening, through a combination of clever management networking and the sheer intrigue surrounding their developing project, they managed to secure highly coveted tickets to the prestigious event, finding themselves seated at a premium table alongside established international superstars like Lenny Kravitz. For a group of young artists who had spent months living on meager budgets and dreaming of the big time, this sudden immersion into the absolute stratosphere of celebrity culture felt like an intoxicating validation of their grandest childhood ambitions. The atmosphere inside the venue was electric, an overwhelming sensory overload of flashing cameras, booming bass lines, and the palpable presence of absolute power and influence, creating an environment where it was incredibly easy for a young person to feel both invincible and profoundly overwhelmed all at the same time. As the champagne flowed and the night progressed into the early hours of the morning, the initial euphoria of sitting among the musical elite began to subtly give way to the immense underlying physical and emotional exhaustion that had been quietly building up over months of intense preparation. The pressure cooker of trying to launch a major musical project without any guarantee of success is a psychological weight that few outside the industry can ever truly understand, creating an environment where even the smallest spark can trigger an absolute emotional explosion among people who are working in close quarters. As the star-studded event finally wound down and the guests began to filter out into the crisp London air to locate their waiting vehicles, a completely sudden, sharp, and highly aggressive verbal altercation erupted between 2 members of the group. shattering the celebratory mood in an instant. It was a brief, heated exchange born of fatigue and the unique tensions of the night, culminating in a harsh, swear-filled dismissal uttered by Melanie Chisholm toward her bandmate Victoria Beckham. A sharp comment that cut straight through the late-night air and immediately stunned the surrounding circle. At the time, it felt to Melanie like just another trivial argument, the kind of friction that naturally occurs between strong-willed individuals who spend every waking hour together, leading her to simply head home, climb into bed, and sleep soundly without the slightest inkling of the massive storm that was brewing for the coming morning. When the morning sun finally broke, the harsh reality of the entertainment industry came crashing down with absolute uncompromising force, transforming what had seemed like a minor late-night dispute into an existential crisis that threatened to completely destroy Melanie's career before it even started. Waking up to a barrage of cold, serious confrontations, she quickly realized that her emotional outburst had not been viewed as a simple disagreement, but rather as a profound breach of discipline and solidarity that the rest of the group and their powerful management team were completely unwilling to tolerate. The collective unity of the group was their absolute greatest asset, a carefully constructed bond of mutual support and shared identity that was meant to be completely impenetrable, meaning that any internal friction was seen as a direct threat to the massive financial and cultural investments being made in their future. Two of her prominent bandmates, Melanie Brown and Jerry Halliwell, approached her with an expression of profound seriousness, explicitly stating in no uncertain terms that they were utterly disgusted by her behavior and the negativity it introduced into the group dynamic. The reprimand did not stop with her peers, as the group's formidable manager quickly intervened, delivering a stern, terrifying ultimatum that left absolutely no room for negotiation or misinterpretation. Melanie was told directly that if any incident of that nature ever occurred again, if she ever stepped out of line or disrupted the harmony of the collective unit for any reason whatsoever, she would be immediately and permanently ejected from the group. A devastating realization that completely freaked her out and sent her into a spiral of intense anxiety. Sitting alone with the weight of that ultimatum, the young singer was struck by a wave of pure terror as she looked at the very real possibility of losing absolutely everything she had ever dreamed of, realizing that her childhood aspirations, which were finally within her actual grasp, could be entirely ruined by one single moment of thoughtless anger. The sheer psychological terror of that definitive ultimatum hung heavily over Melanie Chisholm as she navigated the incredibly tense days that followed, forcing her into a state of hyper-vigilance where every single action, word, and facial expression had to be carefully measured and controlled. The sudden realization that she was entirely replaceable, that the grand future she had envisioned since childhood could be instantly wiped away due to a momentary lapse in judgment, altered her internal relationship with the group and the music industry as a whole. It was during this period of immense quiet anxiety that the gears of the global music machine began to turn with unstoppable force, shifting the five young women from the fringes of the London scene into the absolute center of a global media hurricane. The release of their debut single, Wannabe, in the summer of 1996 did not just succeed in a traditional sense, rather, it exploded across the airwaves like a cultural lightning bolt, shattering records, dominating radio playlists, and capturing the imagination of an entire generation within a matter of weeks. Almost overnight, the quiet rehearsals and the anxiety of the Brit Awards incident were replaced by a chaotic blur of international flights, television appearances, press conferences, and the relentless, suffocating gaze of the global paparazzi. The group had instantly transformed from a struggling musical act into a multi-million-dollar corporate enterprise and a worldwide social phenomenon. A reality that brought unimaginable wealth and fame but also amplified the underlying interpersonal pressures to an almost unbearable degree. Within this newly constructed pressure cooker of global superstardom, the distinct personalities of each member were magnified by the media, creating archetypes that the public devoured but which often trapped the individual women inside highly specific, rigidly defined cultural caricatures. For Melanie Chisholm, who became globally recognized as Sporty Spice due to her signature activewear, athletic prowess, and energetic stage presence, this public persona brought a unique set of challenges and unfair assumptions that she was forced to carry silently for years. As the group traveled from country to country, filling stadiums and dominating the covers of every major music and fashion magazine, The public and the media began to relentlessly analyze every single aspect of her appearance, her demeanor, and her personal life. Because she chose to present herself in athletic clothing rather than the traditional, highly feminized glamour styles adopted by some of her bandmates. The media landscape of the late 1990s quickly began to weaponize these stylistic choices, generating widespread public assumptions regarding her personal sexuality. In an era when the media was far less sensitive and significantly more invasive than it is today, commentators and journalists routinely dropped thinly veiled hints or made direct, crude suggestions that her choice of wardrobe was a definitive statement about her private identity, creating an ongoing narrative that was built entirely on lazy stereotypes. Looking back on that highly intense period decades later, Melanie expressed that while she personally had absolutely no issue with people discussing sexuality, she found the underlying practice of reducing a human being's entire inner life down to their wardrobe choices to be incredibly cheap, disappointing, and deeply unfair. The daily reality of living inside the Spice Girls phenomenon meant existing in a world where privacy completely ceased to exist, and where the boundaries between the public image and the private individual were utterly obliterated by the constant demands of the industry. The five women were trapped together in an endless cycle of work, moving continuously through a maze of luxury hotels, backstage dressing rooms, private jets, and promotional events. A lifestyle that forced them to rely entirely on one another while simultaneously exacerbating any small friction that existed beneath the surface. In this hyper-accelerated environment, the natural dynamics of youth, romance, and personal growth were played out under a massive public microscope, leading to various internal fascinations and habits that became legendary within their inner circle. Melanie Chisholm recently looked back at those chaotic touring years with a sense of fondness and amusement, recalling the distinct interpersonal habits of her bandmates during their absolute peak of global success in the late 90s. When discussing the romantic energies and the social dynamics of the group during a retrospective interview, she openly pointed to Melanie Brown, famously known to the world as Scary Spice, as the absolute most enthusiastic and active pursuer of romance among the five members, affectionately describing her as the most boy-crazy individual in the lineup. She noted with a laugh that when it came to romantic success rates and popularity on the road, Melanie Brown was completely unmatched, possessing a vibrant, magnetic energy that naturally drew people toward her wherever they went in the world. Yet, behind the humorous backstage memories and the incredible highs of performing for hundreds of thousands of screaming fans, the hidden emotional scars from that early 1996 argument with Victoria Beckham continued to subtly influence Melanie Chisholm's psychological approach to her career. The fear of being cast out, of failing to live up to the strict expectations of the collective unit, created a deep-seated need to constantly prove her worth, to work harder, and to push her physical and mental boundaries to the absolute limit. The intense pressure to maintain the flawless, high-energy image of Sporty Spice while internalizing her own personal anxieties began to take a significant toll on her well-being, highlighting the massive, unseen cost that young artists often pay when they are thrust too quickly into the absolute apex of global fame. The contrast between the bright, colorful, endlessly optimistic message of female empowerment that the group broadcasted to the entire world and the rigid, high-stakes corporate discipline enforced behind closed doors created a complex emotional landscape that each member had to navigate in their own separate way. They had successfully conquered the global music market, becoming the most recognizable faces on the planet and redefining the entire structure of modern celebrity culture. But the foundations upon which this massive empire sat remained deeply connected to the silent agreements, the intense compromises, and the volatile personal relationships that had been established before the world ever knew their names. As the decades rolled onward and the blinding dust of that initial 20th century pop cultural explosion finally began to settle, the true, enduring legacy of the Spice Girls transformed from a chaotic contemporary phenomenon into a permanent chapter of modern musical history. The intense, youthful friction that had once threatened to completely tear the group apart before their very first radio broadcast gradually matured into a profound, deeply seasoned understanding of what they had collectively achieved and endured together. For Melanie Chisholm, the terrifying threat of expulsion that had cast such a long, suffocating shadow over her early 20s eventually evolved into a powerful source of profound personal perspective. allowing her to look back at the chaotic trajectory of her life with an immense sense of gratitude, wisdom, and emotional clarity. The passage of time has a unique way of shrinking once monumental conflicts into beautifully small, human moments of shared growth and the fierce. Early dispute with Victoria Beckham became less a symbol of division and more a testament to the incredible, complex humanity of five young women thrust into a historically unprecedented global spotlight. This remarkable journey through the highest peaks of international fame and the deepest valleys of personal isolation ultimately shaped Melanie into a remarkably resilient individual. One who refused to be permanently defined by the rigid constraints of her youthful pop persona or the unfair media narratives that had once surrounded her. In the years following the group's initial hiatuses and subsequent legendary reunion tours, Melanie successfully transitioned from the hyper-accelerated world of global pop stardom into a deeply grounded, fulfilling personal life that stood in stark contrast to the relentless chaos of her early career. A monumental turning point in this journey toward personal peace was the arrival of her daughter, Scarlett, whom she shares with her former long-term partner Thomas Starr, an experience that completely shifted her worldview and provided a profound, unshakable anchor far away from the flashing cameras and the demands of the entertainment industry. Motherhood allowed Melanie to cultivate a safe, private sanctuary where she could finally unpack the immense psychological weight of her youth, ensuring that her daughter grew up surrounded by genuine authenticity, emotional stability, and a deep understanding of self-worth that is entirely independent of public approval. In addition to the immense joy of raising her now 17-year-old daughter, Melanie's personal life found a beautiful, steady chapter of companionship and mutual respect when she began dating Australian model Chris Dingwall in late 2023. This mature relationship, built on a foundation of genuine connection and a shared appreciation for life's simpler pleasures, represented a beautiful departure from the hyper-publicized, scrutinized romances that had defined the pop world of the 90s, allowing her to experience love on her own terms. Completely free from the demands of a global marketing campaign, when Melanie recently sat down to reflect deeply on her life's extraordinary trajectory during her highly anticipated appearance on the Louis Theroux podcast, her raw honesty resonated profoundly with millions of listeners worldwide, offering a rare, unvarnished glimpse behind the heavily guarded curtain of celebrity culture. To hear an iconic figure openly admit to the intense vulnerability, the crippling fear of losing everything over a trivial late-night argument, and the immense pressure to conform to strict behavioral standards was a powerful reminder of the deep human cost that often funds our collective cultural entertainment. Her willingness to discuss the intricate, often messy dynamics of the group with such profound tenderness and total lack of bitterness showcased a woman who had successfully integrated her extraordinary past with her peaceful present, viewing her bandmates not as competitive rivals from an old workplace, but as lifelong sisters who share an exclusive bond that absolutely no one else on earth could ever truly comprehend. The realization that their childhood dreams were an actual, tangible possibility, and the retrospective acknowledgement of how incredibly close they all came to accidentally destroying that future added a poignant, deeply relatable layer to the grand narrative of their historic rise to global dominance. Ultimately, the story of Melanie Chisholm and the Spice Girls serves as a brilliant, multifaceted parable about the immense power of collective ambition, the fragile nature of human relationships under extreme creative and commercial pressure, and the profound importance of reclaiming one's own voice and identity after being consumed by a global phenomenon. They did not merely release pop songs, rather they permanently shifted the global cultural paradigm, injected a vibrant, unapologetic philosophy of female empowerment and solidarity into the mainstream consciousness, and proved that a group of distinct, strong-willed individuals could completely conquer the world on their own unique terms. The internal arguments, the stern ultimatums, the media misinterpretations, and the backstage romances were not barriers to their historical greatness, but rather the very fuel that made their collective energy so wildly magnetic, authentic, and utterly unforgettable to multiple generations of fans. As Melanie continues to move forward through her 50s with absolute grace, confidence, and an unshakable sense of peace, she stands as a powerful beacon of inspiration for anyone striving to navigate the intense pressures of life while holding fast to their true self, reminding us all that even the most volatile beginnings can pave the way toward a beautiful, enduring, and harmonious destiny.